That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And let's just fade that music right down here because it is sad. It is depressing that this team is not only 0-2, because look, the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions won whatever it was, 29 games last year. They were both really good football teams. So it's not the fact that they've lost both these games, but it's how they've lost these two games. This week one performance where they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory and then being absolutely outclassed in week two. We're going to talk about it here. We're going to point some fingers here because it is time to point some fingers. I've tried to be nice most of the offseason, but it's time to point the fingers. And we're going to point some fingers with Leila Rahimi. She is going to be by here in just a little bit. We're going to have a discussion about this Bears team and what needs to be done to get this on the tracks. But let's jump in here with what was just a really, we'll just call it piss poor performance here by the Chicago Bears. And we sit here and go, what is going on with this team? Because as far as anyone can tell, they've got the right coach in Ben Johnson. And yes, I understand that as a head coach, he may not make it, right? He could be another Matt Nagy or another Mark Trestman, an offensive guy who can't be a head coach. I get that. And that's possible. And we're going to see here over the next few years if that's the case. But I will be honest, I have a really hard time believing that Ben Johnson's attention to detail, that Ben Johnson's accountability, that Ben Johnson's culture that he's trying to build is a problem. I don't think the offense is a problem because I'm seeing the Chicago Bears first on a list that their running backs actually gain the most yardage before contact. I couldn't believe it. Now they break away the long runs. So this is more of the down to down runs, not, someone goes for 67 yards after first contact and it floods that. But when you eliminate the runs, the explosive runs and just the basic runs, the Chicago Bears are blocking the running game decently. Now it didn't look like it much in week one. I'll give you that. Week two, it looked a little more functional, but the fact that DeAndre Swift isn't getting it done running the football should be no surprise to anybody. Then we get to, this defense. And oh my goodness, this defense that looked pretty decent for 3 quarters, but maybe it was just because J.J. McCarthy has looked terrible for 7 of the 8 quarters he's played, and now he's injured. He's going to be out a few weeks. But maybe it was just that J.J. McCarthy was making his first career start and wasn't very good. Because when you get whipped by J.J. McCarthy in the 4th quarter, and then Jared Goff and John Morton, who offensive coordinator-wise was atrocious in week 1 against the Packers, is now doing anything he pleases against this Chicago Bears defense. Now, do we want to blame Dennis Allen? We can. I'm sure there's some blame that needs to go on Dennis Allen, but Dennis Allen has been regularly considered one of the top defensive coordinator minds in the league for several years. Has it suddenly passed him all by? Or perhaps do we sit there and say, it's too early to point the finger at coaching. We need to point the finger somewhere else. So where else can we point the finger? Well, then we need to point the finger at the players. So let's talk about the players. Let's talk about these players that seemingly had no interest playing for Matt Eberflus anymore. And you heard it's Eberflus, it's Eberflus, it's Eberflus. They fire Eberflus. Thomas Brown comes in. Now, Matt Eberflus was a hands-off guy. Matt Eberflus was a more of a mild-mannered guy, have some fun with the guys in the locker room. Thomas Brown, little more in your face, a little more hard-nosed. That's what the players need, right? How'd their effort go the rest of the way last year? It didn't? Oh, it didn't. Okay. So then let's look at this season. Now, Ben Johnson is holding them accountable. Kevin Byard says that Dennis Allen is militaristic in how much he's holding guys accountable and how hard he coaches guys. So now we've gone all the way the other direction. How's that going? Still not going. So if the players want to blame Matt Eberflus and not respond to Thomas Brown, and now they're not responding to Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen, maybe they ought to start looking in the mirror. And if they're going to start looking in the mirror, then maybe they can look at someone like Tyreek Stevenson that had a stupid penalty, a stupid, defensive hold, whatever it was, illegal contact with Tyreek Stevenson that negated a Montez Sweat sack that gave the Lions, rather than 3rd and long, a first down. They march down in the first half, get a touchdown, and that starts changing the momentum of the game. Let's talk about a defensive front that gets no pass rush on Jared Goff. He does whatever he wants. Meanwhile, Tyreek Stevenson is getting absolutely torched everywhere on the field. TJ Edwards gets a contract extension and is hurt. Jalen Johnson, not a Ryan Poles draft pick, a Ryan Pace draft pick, he is hurt. Kyler Gordon is hurt. When you look at this defensive line, Gervon Dexter had a 0.0% pass rush win rate against the Detroit Lions. Not one rep did he win. So we start looking at the players a little bit more. Now, Ben Johnson on Monday says that we have to start evaluating how some of these players look without their hands on the ball, and maybe things need to start changing a little bit, i.e. we got to hold some of these guys accountable. All right, so what is Ben Johnson talking about? Is he talking about the defense? No, he's not talking about the defense, because he's talking about when the hand's not in the ball, which means he's not talking about the offensive line either. That means he's not talking about Caleb Williams. So where does this leave him? It leaves him, I don't think he's talking about Kyle Monangai and his 3 snaps. I don't think he's talking about Luther Burden and his 6 snaps, or Colston Loveland barely being on the field. He's talking about the guys on the field. So who's he talking about? He's talking about either Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Olamide Zaccheaus, or Cole Kmet. We can narrow it down that quickly with this group of guys that Ben Johnson called out. So now let's look at it. Cole Kmet, is he calling out Cole Kmet? It's possible, but I think Cole Kmet's been blocking pretty damn hard. Not perfectly, but I think the effort has been there. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I've seen. Cole Kmet giving an effort. Olamide Zaccheaus doesn't mind getting dirty, doesn't mind blocking. So now we get to the other 2 guys. Rome Odunze, who just played 100% of the snaps against the Detroit Lions. Do we think Ben Johnson is upset with Rome Odunze when Rome Odunze is on the field the entire game? And then that leaves us with one other name, and that name is DJ Moore. Is it only DJ Moore he's calling out? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. Ben left it vague for a reason. But I'm pretty damn confident at least one of the names he's calling out is DJ Moore, who was given a big bag of cash to stick around and was supposed to be the guy, the quarterback's best friend, the rookie quarterback, second-year quarterback's best friend, who seems to have no interest in being on this football team with Caleb Williams, pouted last season. We know the issues, and now it looks like the coach, the new coach, may not be thrilled with him either. Am I making some jumps? Yes, I'm making some jumps, but feel free to tweet at me at Bill T. Zimmerman and tell me I'm wrong. Tell me who Ben Johnson is talking about when he's talking about we're going to have to reassess some things because it's not, they don't like the way it looks when certain players don't have the ball in their hands. Who's he talking about? Because I think DeAndre Swift's effort is there. He's not good. He's not in the right role because DeAndre Swift should be a RB2 and he's trying to be a workhorse RB1, and that's not him because the roster is flawed. And that gets us to the problem. So if the players are the issue, you need to start looking at the guy that put together this roster. The guy who said, oh, the Steelers don't want anything to do with Chase Claypool. I can fix him. Oh, the Titans don't want anything to do with Nate Davis. And the coaches on my staff, this is not me making this up. This is stuff that actually has been reported in the papers online and on television and radio. That Nate Davis, whose coaching staff that had some members of it on the Chicago Bears said, don't sign him. Whatever you do, don't sign him. It's not a good idea. Ryan Poles says, I can fix him. This is a guy who has had 4 day 2 picks in 2024 and 2025 in the names of Karan Amagaji, Luther Burden, Shamar Turner, and Ozzie Trapillo. And how many of those guys were healthy scratches on Sunday? But 3. Were they hurt? No, they just weren't good enough to be active. We are starting to look at a certain situation. Za Frazier, a weird situation. They drafted an older rookie again, just like they did with Velus Jones. Now Za Frazier's losing an entire season. He's going to be like 27 years old as a rookie next season. That's a long shot that's ever going to work. We're looking at the fact that Velus Jones failed, that Braxton Jones right now, that we kept calling a win for Ryan Poles, is now playing. I know it's just 2 weeks. It's a small sample size, but is literally the second worst offensive lineman in the NFL by the metrics. I'm not making that up. That's in the statistics. That's how poorly Braxton Jones is playing. When you look at this roster and you constantly are talking about the flaws on this roster and what Ryan Poles gave up in certain circumstances to get these guys, you need to start pointing the finger at the guy that put this roster together, and that is Ryan Poles. Montez Sweat, and I know he had a sack taken away from him, but other than that, he has been invisible for 2 games. He is playing just like he did in 2024. This is a guy you're paying $25 million a year to, and gave up a second-round pick to get this guy, and you are not getting the return. You just simply aren't. This is a guy who thought it was fine to come into a season with Austin Booker as your third defensive end and nothing behind him. And now that Austin Booker is hurt, they have no depth at edge. Their defensive tackle, their second-round defensive tackle, is being outperformed by Chris Williams, who was a pickup off the scrap heap the Cleveland Browns were probably going to cut. So Poles does one of those 7-6 round swaps so he can get him on the roster. And now Chris Williams is ahead of Shamar Turner on the depth chart. I know Turner was hurt, but that is inexcusable. Turner should at least be out there getting 10, 12 snaps if he was performing well enough to do that. Ozzie Trapillo is inactive, and Karan Amagaji is inactive against a UDFA and Theo Benedict. And you can sit there and say it's a nice story with Theo Benedict, and it is. No excuses that those 2 guys are inactive behind him. It is ridiculous. These are lost draft pieces. I know a lot of you love Torrey Taylor, but a 4th-round pick for Torrey Taylor is asinine. He has drafted 2 punters in 3 years. Like, what on earth is going on here at Hallis Hall with this general manager? And Dan Weeder wrote that piece in November. We had Dan on this podcast to talk about Ryan Poles, to talk about his flaws, and then Ty Dunn. And forget the Caleb Williams thing. I know Ty Dunn and everyone just clicks and turns off. I'm not talking about the Caleb Williams stuff. You have issues with the Caleb Williams stuff, that's fine. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about parts 2 and parts 3 about Ryan Poles, about a guy that didn't actually assess all the great quarterbacks coming out in 2024 and just said it's going to be Caleb Williams, and he cooked the process to make sure Caleb Williams was the guy and everyone else got laughed away. I'm not saying Caleb Williams shouldn't have been the guy, but you should be doing a full evaluation. We crushed Ryan Pace that he did the evaluation on Mahomes and Trubisky, but didn't bother on Deshaun Watson for whatever reason he didn't want. We crushed Ryan Pace for his process. Now Ryan Poles doesn't consider Jaden Daniels, doesn't consider Bo Nix, doesn't consider Michael Penix, and doesn't consider Drake May. Laughs scouts out of the room if they want to say positive things about Drake May. That is what Ryan Poles did. He's also a guy that apparently has his entire staff on eggshells, has disagreements going on, a lot of issues at Hallis Hall, and Ryan Poles is the guy in charge. And this is a guy who continues to fail. I mean, we just look at this. 2022, it didn't matter because the 3-14 record didn't matter because he was tearing down the roster. And then 2023, the 7-10 record didn't matter because he didn't have the right quarterback. And then in 2024, it all fell apart. They go 5-12, and it doesn't matter because he doesn't have the right coach. We keep giving this man excuses. You need to stop giving this man excuses. He now has a 28% winning percentage in over 3 seasons as the general manager of the Chicago Bears. That averages out to 4.8 wins a season. And it's those numbers, his 34 draft picks, that have resulted in 0 Pro Bowlers, not a 1. And he is getting an extension from the powers that be at Hallis Hall. Did Kevin Warren and George McCaskey agree? Did they disagree? A lot of things written about Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles seems to be that they may not be on the same page. I'm not saying Kevin Warren said no to an extension for Ryan Poles. I am not saying Kevin Warren said absolutely we must extend Ryan Poles. I'm just saying that if things that have been reported are true, that Kevin Warren was iffy about Ryan Poles, and yet a 3-year extension was tacked onto a contract that still had 2 years remaining on it. And yes, does it make sense to line him up with Ben Johnson? Sure, if you're confident that he's the guy moving forward. But what has this man done in 3+ years as general manager, other than hiring Ben Johnson? And his agent, Rick Smith, came on this podcast, Ben Johnson's agent did, in January, and said the big reason this deal got done was Kevin Warren. He did not mention Ryan Poles. He said Ben thought he could work with Ryan Poles, but he said Kevin Warren was the big reason that deal got done. So now we're sitting here going, what has Ryan Poles done? And we can sit there and say Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze and Darnell Wright, but these are number 1 overall picks, top 10 picks. These are the guys you should be getting a lot of value out of. And you can argue he is not getting enough value out of these guys. So what is the deal? What does Ryan Poles have on his resume that sits there and says this man should have been extended for 3 additional years, other than a coach that apparently the president had a lot to do with him getting hired? This is the situation that George McCaskey, and I'm going to point it at George, has put the Chicago Bears in. Because what are they going to do with Ryan Poles? I sat here all off season and I tried to be positive, but at the same time, and you kept hearing it leaking out in these podcasts about the problem is still Ryan Poles. And what have I said? I said Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams can pair and be great, but the general manager needs to make sure this roster has enough talent for it to truly compete for a Super Bowl. Because if it's a lot of mediocre players with a great QB and a great head coach, yes, they are going to overachieve regularly, but they are not going to be true Super Bowl contenders. They'll be the type of team that goes 9-8 and 10-7, makes the playoffs, maybe wins a game sometimes, but they are not going to be legitimate contenders to win a Super Bowl, because Ryan Poles will not have the type of roster that he needs to have to truly compete. Because now the Bears are in a situation, they're up against it with the cap. They have spent their money. They, every year they come in, they've got 30, 40, 50, 60 million in cap. They don't have that anymore. If they want salary cap space next year, they've got to move contracts. They've got to restructure contracts to try and create enough space just to keep some of their guys, let alone going out and signing free agents. They are in a situation where the roster they have right now is their core roster, unless they want to hit a serious reset button and trade DJ Moore and trade Montez Sweat and cut Tremaine Edmonds and cut DeAndre Swift and do the kind of things that you need to do to create cap space, because right now they don't have it. You get a lot of free passes when you're an early general manager and you're rebuilding your roster, because you don't have veterans that you need to pay contracts to. So you can cover up a lot of misses in the draft with free agent signings. But now you have to, now that you've filled up your cap space, you have to start hitting on draft picks, and he simply doesn't do it. I understand it's only 2 games in, and all these guys could turn out to be great, and you can all tell me I'm a dumbass and tell me to shove it up my rear. That's fine. But right now, we're looking at Colson Loveland and Luther Burden. They're out on the field. They haven't done much yet. Maybe they're developing, but the next 2 guys they drafted are inactive. Another guy is only being used on special teams. An opportunity opened up for Ruben Hippolyte to start because TJ Edwards is hurt and Noah Sewell is the guy, not Ruben Hippolyte. And then you sit there, you got the Za Frazier issue. Luke Newman looks like a decent 6th-round pick, but and Kyle Monangai, maybe decent in the 7th round, but again, it's too early to tell on him. You've got constant misses with these draft picks, and you got silly things like Torrey Taylor in the 4th round. You've got trading away 2nd-round picks for Montez Sweat and Chase Claypool, who are not giving you returns. You didn't probably get enough of a return on Khalil Mack or Roquan Smith. The list goes on and on and on with Ryan Poles. This is not the right man for the job, and the Chicago Bears, with nothing on his resume to show that he was worthy of a contract extension. You could have waited a year and seen how year one with Ben Johnson went, and then given him an extension, there would have been nothing wrong with that. He still would have had a full year left, a very typical time to give an extension, but you rushed to it. You gave it to him with 2 years to go on that deal. And now the Chicago Bears have Ryan Poles under contract for 5 years. And you have to figure after this season, if they want to make a change, they'd have to, one, they'd be firing him before this contract extension he signed even kicked in. And at that point, you're probably eating what, $15 million after you already ate probably $15 million for Matt Eberflus to have these guys not coach and not be the general manager of this football team. Are they willing to do that? I don't know. I don't know what George McCaskey is willing to do. Now, you could sit there and say he's never fired a coach in season. They finally did it with Matt Eberflus, but that doesn't mean they're going to get rid of Ryan Poles early as well. But again, if we're going to sit here and be all excited about Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze and all these pieces that this team supposedly has in place, then we need to look at the general manager and wonder, why is this team losing 52-21? Why is this team giving up 694 yards of offense and 73 points in the last 5 quarters of football? They have been humiliated. They have been outclassed. And we can sit here and we can blame Ben Johnson and we can blame Dennis Allen. And I'm sure they did not have their best performances either, or that wouldn't have happened. But you have to look at the roster that Ryan Poles has built. This is a lousy running back room. This is an offensive line with no depth because the players he drafted to be those depth pieces are inactive because they simply are not good enough to perform. This is a defensive line that can't get a pass rush. This is a linebacker group that should not have re-signed TJ Edwards to that extension. Now he's hurt and starting to show his age. And this is a secondary that was supposed to be the strength of this team, but you gave money to Jalen Johnson, who's injury prone. You gave money to Kyler Gordon, who's injury prone. And now you have Jaquan Brisker, who you have to hope stays out on this field. And now Tyreek Stevenson is your CB1 moving forward to cover guys like CD Lamb. This roster has major flaws. This is a major problem for the Chicago Bears, and there is no quick solution. Hopefully Ben Johnson can start holding these guys accountable, can start getting Monday to Saturday looking a little better, and the results look better on Sunday. Hopefully he can squeeze blood from a stone out of these guys, because right now it does not work. The pieces do not fit. The pieces are not trying hard enough, whatever it might be. This is a situation at Hallis Hall that needs a lot of work. This was just not a head coach that needed to come in and get the best out of Caleb Williams and let's march forward and win 11 games. That is not the situation. This is the situation where this coach needs to rebuild the culture from the ground up, the culture that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus were building for 3 years and failed building a culture. Now, hopefully, with the lessons he learned from Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson can build a culture. But hopefully he can do it without Ryan Poles as the general manager. But I have serious doubts the Chicago Bears are going to do anything about it, because the one thing we've learned is they like to settle for mediocrity. Ryan Pace was a general manager that everyone screamed wasn't good enough for the job, and he needed to be fired. And I'm not saying that's inaccurate. But in Ryan Pace's 4th year, Ryan Pace, that was the 2018 team that went to the playoffs, that won the division. And we can sit there and say, oh, well, it was Vic Fangio. It was Vic Fangio. Who put that defense together? That was Ryan Pace. Kyle Fuller was a hangover previously, but he brought in Akeem Hicks. He traded for Khalil Mack. He drafted Leonard Floyd. He drafted Roquan Smith. He signed Danny Trevathan. He drafted Eddie Jackson. He drafted Adrian Amos. He put this team together. That elite defense was Ryan Pace's players. And you can sit there and say he spent too much money on it, all the things. That's fine. But at this point in Ryan Pace's tenure, he was about to have a tremendous season, and he had drafted 2 blue chip guys in Roquan Smith and Eddie Jackson. And Ryan Poles is staring down the barrel of another bad season and 0 blue chip players to show for it. Ryan Pace has more blue chip players that he's drafted on this roster, and he hasn't been here since 2021. Ryan Pace has drafted more blue chip players on this current roster than Ryan Poles. That's the situation the Chicago Bears are in. It is unacceptable. We will talk to Leila Rahimi about all this next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. Always excited to have a first-time guest on the podcast, and that's what we have here. She is Leila Rahimi. You know her from Rahimi and Harris on the middays on The Score. Does a great job over there. And I think we share some similar views about Ryan Poles. We connected on Twitter/X there on Sunday while the Bears were getting flattened by the Detroit Lions. So looking forward to this conversation. Leila, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Yeah, it's nice to officially meet you on the podcast. And for the record, I'd been paying attention to your opinions for a while. So it's not just Sunday for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I like giving opinions, and my whole thing is I give my opinion, whether it's the popular opinion and it goes in line with everybody, or the least popular opinion out there, which gets people, unhappy, especially when Ben Johnson is hired and everything was supposed to be rosy coming into this season. So sometimes when you give them that little splice of reality, people are not too kind with it.
No, I completely agree. And I think you can hire a head coach. It doesn't mean you have to extend a 15 and at the time 36 general manager.
Yeah, and that's where I came with a lot of this, and we're definitely going to get into it. But let's just start with the game itself. Obviously, an absolute debacle of a second half in Detroit. What was kind of your thought while you watched that game, especially in the second half? What was the issue you felt? Was it coaching? Was it effort? Was it a talent gap? What did you see that caused such a mess in the second half of that football game?
Unfortunately, I think one of the big things that I've been seeing is players not winning one-on-one battles, and that would mean talent and execution. I'm not quite sure what the scheme would have been for Dennis Allen's defense had guys like TJ Edwards and Jalen Johnson been healthy, Kyler Gordon too. And I think that is unfortunate as well, because for all we saw on the Monday Night Football game and heard about them mixing up coverages, and you couldn't tell whether it was zone or man for the Manning brothers to talk about live when they were doing the show. I don't feel like that was the case for Jared Goff and company. They picked it apart pretty surgically. That's where you have to start, is defensively, I feel like, when we're talking about a Lions team that hung up half 100 on them. 52 points. That's just absolutely ridiculous. It hadn't happened since 2014. I feel like they also got burned on some of the things they wanted to do schematically. Safety blitz with Jaquan Brisker, everybody saw coming apparently. It wasn't an issue for the Lions. They were able to pick it up and get big yards. 7 explosive plays, that was also a massive issue. They couldn't seem to stop anybody. And the underneath routes and the crossing routes, which is what that offense does well, seemed to really eat up the Bears. So I'm not sure what they're trying to do that was supposed to be working. And then move forward to even yesterday's press conference from Ben Johnson, when you're hearing him talk about Montez Sweat needing to win more one-on-one battles. That gives me the indication that the talent isn't as good as they perhaps thought it was to execute some of this stuff, but also it's more alarming because he's 4 years, $98 million. They didn't sack Jared Goff once. Dayo Odeyingbo's 3 years and $48 million. Grady Jarrett's 3 years and $42.75 million. So you spent a lot of money, more so than a lot of other teams in the league, on your defense. And we have yet to see it show up in a way that's favorable.
Yeah, and that defensive line now I had faith in the tackles between Dexter. I saw is 0.0% pass rush win rate. I obviously can't have that. These kind of things. Obviously, Dexter looked pretty good in week 1, but I thought the tackles would be pretty good. But the edge room, I just, Dayo Odeyingbo, I understand they're projecting him forward to think what he can be. Montez Sweat, it's not just the contract that you talk about, but it's trading a second-round pick to secure him so you can give him that contract. And then behind him, I know Austin Booker's hurt, and that was the plan for the third edge. But the depth in that room, there weren't enough NFL caliber players there. And we know how important it is to rush the passer. And all off season, when I looked at this and I was like, the running back room and, most of the position groups you thought were going to be okay, but I was still sitting there going, how are they going to bring pressure from the outside if Montez Sweat doesn't return to that 2023 form. That was the only way it was going to happen.
And there's the operative word, 2023. Like we're now a whole season removed. We had the entire 24 season. I know he was hurt. I know. But the problem is we don't know to what extent because the Bears never really said. They didn't really ever specify. Montez Sweat already didn't play all the snaps, as we know. He played 66% of the snaps on Sunday. Gervon Dexter in the 50s. So that tells you a lot, too, when you consider that piece of it. It's not just that. It's also the secondary was already banged up going into the season. Terrell Smith suffers that awful injury. Josh Blackwell, we know, is hurt. Kyler Gordon, we're still trying to figure out how to gauge his injury. There's a lot going on there where you're having to say, this isn't the full complement. And what did Jared Goff do? He just found 29 Tyreek Stevenson. That seemed to be the plan. And frankly, I think it was a lot of the Vikings plan in the second half of that game.
Yeah, and I actually, that was the next person I was going to bring up. I'm glad you did, because like you talk about with that Vikings game, and I crunched the numbers really quick. I mean, it's not complicated math, but when you look at that fourth quarter of that football game where JJ McCarthy, who has had 8 quarters of professional football and 7 of them have been terrible, that fourth quarter, manufactured by JJ McCarthy with the Lions game, it's 73 points and 694 yards of offense in 5 quarters that this defense has given up. It's they're video game numbers at that point. And when you have Jalen Johnson hurt and Kyler Gordon hurt and all these guys hurt, and yet you're still targeting Tyreek Stevenson, who has a perfect quarterback rating against, I know it's not a perfect stat, but perfect quarterback rating against 158.3 when he's targeted. He is a major liability out there and has basically been one since the Hail Mary game last year.
And guess what that means? That means that your vaunted scouting, even on defense, which typically we know is easier to scout than offense, is incorrect. So how many draft picks do we want to evaluate from Ryan Poles? Because even the guys you thought you could hang your hat on, Jaquan Brisker missed a considerable portion of the season because of an injury. That was the right decision, but that speaks to availability. Then you had Kyler Gordon. So he's the star of all 3, now 4 Ryan Poles draft classes to speak of. We're still figuring out Caleb Williams. Roma Odunze looks to be promising. Okay, that's pick 1 and pick 9 of 2024. But when it comes to everybody else, Stevenson being a part of that really speaks to, I think, a lot of the deficiencies that you and I have seen in the draft. Why does it take you and I to point out that he spent 2 draft picks on punters, for example?
And in the 4th round.
And Tory Taylor isn't getting you what you thought you were going to get, by the way.
Yeah, he thought Tory Taylor was going to be one of the top 3 or 4 punters in the league, and Tory Taylor was borderline top 10 last year, which you sit there and say, all right, can he build upon that? But he, at least at this point, has regressed. And I think when you bring up the talent here on the field and the draft picks that Ryan Poles has had, I mean, when you just boil this down, and we don't know what, like you said, Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, if you want to throw Darnell Wright in there as well. But again, these are top 10 picks, exactly how good these players are going to become. But at present, when we're looking at 4 drafts for Ryan Poles, the whole key here is finding difference makers. And when you are basically maxed out in the cap, which is where they are now, they're not going to be able to make major additions at this point when those rare blue chip players do reach free agency. He's got to find them in the draft. And right now, at this point, to me, the Bears have 2 blue chip guys. They are Jalen Johnson and they are Joe Thuney. And Jalen Johnson is a holdover from Ryan Pace, and Joe Thuney is a 33-year-old guard who is great, but the Chiefs were willing to move on from him at an affordable price to try and keep their younger offensive linemen together when they were up against the cap. So when you look at this team, you need to look at the general manager and the scouting department in terms of maintaining talent on this roster and finding, they don't have enough difference makers yet. They need to find more of them. They're going to have to find them in the draft. And there hasn't been anything now in 34 draft picks that gives you confidence that Ryan Poles is going to be able to find these guys, especially outside of the top 10.
Well, that's the hard part, Bill, is that we have been preaching these drafts aren't good enough, and they haven't been good enough. And not only are the Bears drafting based on potential, which is wild when you consider how much tape is out there on players, they're also paying based on potential. And that is a practice that very few teams do in the NFL. And unfortunately, I would say that last GM of the Bears did the same thing. He was also a pay on potential type of guy, or pay on past service when you consider contracts like Jimmy Graham, for example, where he overpaid the entire market for him. There's a pattern here, unfortunately. And it comes in this idea that, oh, we're going to pay you because of what we think is going to happen. I have no proof saying that Ryan Poles in the front office has any reason to be trusted as to predicting the future. How do I know they know what's going to happen? Kyler Gordon impressed me after his rookie season. There's no doubt about that. I think he had a rough rookie season. I do feel like he has developed, but you can't say that about everybody else. And that's when it's really unfortunate. Ben Johnson can't fix that. Ben Johnson can't win Montez Sweat's one-on-one battles.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like, if we talked, about Ryan Pace a little bit, and if you want to compare resumes through 4 seasons, and I think that's fair. And look, Ryan Pace was disliked by a lot of Bears fans. They wanted him to be fired. And I'm not saying that was the wrong choice. I think that was the right choice, especially where things got those last couple years. But the 4th season of Ryan Pace was 2018, was the great 2018 season. And I know Bears fans don't like giving Matt Nagy credit for that season. They like saying it was all Vic Fangio, and that's fine. But that defense that Vic Fangio had was Ryan Pace's defense. Yes, Kyle Fuller was a holdover from Phil Emery. But other than that, I mean, Leonard Floyd was his pick. Roquan Smith was his pick. Eddie Jackson was his pick. And that's a big difference there, is with Ryan Pace. And I'm not good. He missed with Mitch Trubisky. I'm not giving the guy any excuses.
Ryan Pace missed with a lot of people, and he couldn't manage a salary cap.
Yeah,
we can just throw that out there.
We know his issues, but this is still a guy who drafted Adrian Amos in the 5th round and Eddie Jackson in the 4th round, and even guys like Jordan Howard and
Charles Leno.
Yeah. Leno was a 7th round pick. Like, these are the guys that were a big core of this team. Darnell Mooney in the 5th round. Ryan Pace was able to find these guys. He had other issues that were his downfall, but at least the scouting was there where you had faith that a 4th round pick. I get so frustrated when Ryan Pace would trade away 4th round picks, because that's where he ate. He found so many great guys in that range. So when I sit here and look at this roster and go, they need to fix some things in the draft, but how can I have any faith that this general manager is going to be able to find the talent here? When you look at, and again, I'm not saying Ozzie Trapillo is a bust. He hasn't played in the NFL yet at this point. But when your general manager has 4 day 2 picks from the last 2 years, and they're all still on the roster, but 3 of them are inactive, healthy scratches on game day, that has to raise a lot of alarms.
Well, and I think it did. And that's why a lot of people finally realized, even before the game started, how bad of a look that is for the general manager. And you and I were 2 of very few people who were calling out the idea of Ryan Poles getting extended. I got a lot of hell, and now people are saying they're like, oh, where did that happen? The internet reply guys, they're like, oh, show us that. No, look up literally every post about 670 the score had on this where I'm talking. You can see the replies for yourself, but that would require work and logic. So that's not really their strong suit. But the point is, there was a huge pushback against anybody who said Poles didn't even deserve an extension, to just simply wait until that happened. And I agree with the NFL thought process that you should align coach, GM, and quarterback, but that's not what happened either. Your coach is different. This coach wasn't here when the quarterback got drafted. So it's still not harmonized. And extending this guy doesn't necessarily do it. What if you realize in the season that he didn't get you the players that you wanted? Perhaps Ben Johnson was choosing from a board, and the board wasn't great. That's the other problem is how much work goes into what happened previously before he got here. And yeah, he was probably scouting players on the Lions, but even then, you want other balance there. Ryan Poles isn't Brad Holmes, period.
Yeah, no, there's a significant difference there. He's not Brian Gutekunst either. I mean, there's there's an issue. The NFC North is loaded with coaches and front office executives. And right now, hopefully the Bears have it right with the head coach, but they certainly don't have it right in the front office. And like you talked about, he had 2 years left. And I get the idea of trying to put everyone on the same timeline and aligning everything. But you can still do that if you wait a year and then give him the 3-year extension, because the Bears go 9-8 or 10-7. You like the direction everything's headed. So you say, okay, Ryan, here's your extension. The fact that you do that, coming off of like you talked about, a guy who has only won 15 games in 3 seasons, is on his second coach, and talk about the multiple defensive coordinators, multiple offensive coordinators, how they didn't line anything up. The idea that Kevin Warren should have been here first and been part of the hiring process of the general manager, who then is part of the hiring process of the head coach, who's then is part of picking the quarterback. That's the alignment everyone needs, but the Bears have never done that. They keep going out of order. And now you have a situation, and hopefully this works out with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, but you don't know. And if in a couple of years, if it's not working right, I don't think Ben Johnson's going anywhere. So if Caleb Williams can't run his offense, and certainly things look better for Caleb Williams in week 2 than they did for week 1, I think, Ben Johnson's going to tell people, we need a new quarterback in that room. He will do it. He has no fear, I don't think, of doing that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of questions and not a lot of answers right now. And we're only 2 weeks into a season that people really thought, 2024 was supposed to be the big breakout season. They went 5-12. 2025, then that's going to be the big breakout season. Maybe it still can be, but they're sitting at 0-2 and not looking good.
Here's the other thing. Say the Bears go 5-12 again, because they have a brutal schedule.
Yes, they do.
As we know. And you'd already lost one of the games in the division that you thought you were going to win. And then the Packers got Micah Parsons, and they look like the best team in the NFC. So
maybe the NFL.
Factor all of that in. Say they're a 5-win team this year, and you don't have a 10-game losing streak. Unfortunately, it's probably like you pepper in those wins and losses, because we know that the 2022 Lions, for example, went 1-6. And that should be accepted. There should be a learning curve with installing a new offense and having to teach a quarterback entirely new habits. There should be some space there to work with. Although you don't think it's going to look like this. But all of that said, and there's massive disconnect between what the coach wants to do with the roster and what he's actually able to do. And now you're stuck with this guy for years? Like, that's the issue here. The power play shifted when they decided to bring in Ben Johnson, and it gave fans a sigh of relief. But now you've created an issue where perhaps he doesn't want to work with this general manager moving forward. And there were rumors, I don't know if you recall, Bill, but there were rumors that Ben Johnson did want to bring in his own personnel person whenever he was leaving Detroit, and he was a head coaching candidate. And that was a thought, was because they liked the group they had at the time building that team in Detroit. So what if he's stuck? Did anybody ever think about that possible scenario? Because as a first-time head coach, I'm observing that maybe he doesn't have to necessarily work with that general manager, and now he's forced to.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what it was behind the scenes. Maybe Ben Johnson's like, yeah, give this guy an extension. We have no idea what happened. But, there certainly were some questions whether, Dan Wiederer posted it in his article from November that was pretty scathing on Ryan Poles. I know people don't like anyone to mention the name Ty Dunn, but same thing in those pieces about that possibly Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles weren't on the same page, which makes you think that was a George McCaskey decision. And those decisions are always dangerous, because when you look at a general manager, and I want to ask you about Caleb Williams and a couple other things, but last thing on Ryan Poles, and again, and I'll use, again, not the Caleb Williams part, everyone. So don't click off on your podcast just yet, because I mentioned the name Ty Dunn. But on the second and third parts where he talked about Ryan Poles, it lined up a lot with what Dan Wiederer had in Dan Wiederer's piece about how he was warned about Chase Claypool and said, nope, I'm going to get him anyway. He was warned from a Tennessee Titans coach that was now on the Bears staff. Do not sign Nate Davis. He is not the guy you want. And he signs him anyway. Where Ryan Poles, according to Ty Dunn, basically cooked the process for Caleb Williams. And I'm not saying Caleb Williams was the wrong selection, but we crushed Ryan Pace for not looking at Deshaun Watson. And he basically just looked at Mitch Trubisky and Patrick Mahomes and went with Trubisky. Ryan Pace got crushed for that. Well, Ryan Poles didn't look at Jaden Daniels, didn't look at Drake May. He didn't look at any of them seriously. He dismissed them all because he had made up in his mind that Caleb Williams was the next Patrick Mahomes. And again, like I said, I'm not saying that Caleb's the wrong choice, but when you have the number one pick in an elite quarterback class, there are not many of these. 2020 was one of them, 2004, 1983. There's not a lot of these that come along. And yet you just said, nope, Caleb's my guy. I'm not even going to consider anyone else. That's not the vetting process you want to hear.
Well, additionally, it's not even the Tyler Dunn article. It's the fact that it echoes what we saw in the Seth Wickersham book. And Seth Wickersham told Marshall Harris and me on 670 The Score that Ryan Poles didn't even scout Jaden Daniels. And while, yes, publicly it looked like Caleb Williams was consensus, slam dunk, no-brainer number one, there were still a lot of people willing to compliment Jaden Daniels and what he did. Additionally, this is game-changing information that Wickersham had from his father, Carl, Caleb Williams' father, that he sourced and he fact-checked for integrity. It's not like this is some sneaky behind-the-scenes gotcha information. This is openly sourced for a book. The jig is up. And so that's when Carl had said and talked to Caleb and been like, should we go here? So if he didn't want to go there, the least you can do as a general manager is your due diligence and scout, I don't know, the number two guy who was also considered very good and took his team almost to the Super Bowl last year. Yeah, notwithstanding the game against the Packers, I think they're making everybody look silly right now. He's still somebody that you see what the potential is. But then the other part of this is, say he was the right fit and Ryan Poles stood on business or traded down out of that pick, whatever. Say that's the case. You think they had the infrastructure in place to develop Jaden Daniels into what he's turned into with Washington? I can't confidently say that. Maybe this year, but not last year.
Yeah, and that's it's frustrating, and it's been frustrating for years. The amount of times a fan will push back and be like, well, if the Bears drafted so-and-so, he wouldn't have been any good. If the Bears drafted Patrick Mahomes, they would have ruined him. If the Bears drafted Jalen Carter, he would have been a disaster with his attitude with this team. And you want to sit there and say, no, they need the blue chip players. But at the same time, it's hard to argue against that because the fact is the Bears don't get blue chip players and develop blue chip players, and there has to be a reason behind it. And obviously the reason is what happens regularly at Hallis Hall.
Oh, they do sometimes. They just trade him away to Baltimore and then use that pick to get Chase Claypool.
that they do. That is something that certainly happened. Leila, let's switch gears here because I think we could pile on Ryan Poles for an hour and a half. I do want to get your thoughts on Caleb Williams. I was very alarmed with what I saw. I've been a huge proponent of Caleb Williams, big fan of his. I thought it was the right move to get him here. So I'm a big fan of him as a quarterback, but I wanted it to look better than it did in week one. I saw a lot of things that I just sit there and go, between the errant passes, between the frantic feel he had in the pocket, just missing players downfield, like there were a lot of concerns there. Now, I think week two, the operation was better. Things look better. But at the same time, when you lose a game 52-21, why couldn't that game have been, even if the defense is going to be that bad, couldn't the game have been 45-35 and you feel a little better about the operation of the offense? There's still concerns there. I understand it's just 2 games with Ben Johnson. We've got a long way to go. But for a guy that thought Caleb Williams was going to be the first really like top 10 quarterback the Bears have had, maybe you could argue Jim McMahon for a year or two, but basically going all the way back to Sid Luckman. I thought Caleb was going to be the guy, and I still have hope for it, but there's a lot more concerns I have at this point in the season this year than I had at any point last season.
Yeah, I am not as alarm bells sounding on Caleb Williams because we saw progress last week, for example. And even with what happened in week one with the accuracy, we still saw a drive go down the field for a touchdown. I know this is going to take some time to put in the proper habits with him. And I'm sorry that there's a lot of random drilling if it's in the background. I don't know what's going on in my building today. But Caleb Williams is a work in progress in that respect. I'm going to give him time because I know he's got the physical traits to be able to, once he puts this together, execute it well. I'm not going to ring any alarms just yet because it was really, really good, in my opinion, to see both first drives of both games go down the field and score a touchdown. That is huge progress from what we saw last year. And I think that means he's learning better habits. The checkdowns are getting better. You're waiting to see the marriage of the footwork and the eye discipline. And that's something that comes in time. It also dictates how we watch the game. So then the game slows down to us because the camera follows the quarterback in real time. So I think all of that is something that will take some time, but at least we're seeing parts of it show consistently.
Yeah, we definitely have. And like I said, I mean, and there were games last year that he looked phenomenal, 300 plus yards, multiple touchdowns. We know the talent's there. It's just, will it all come together in the end? And can he execute the Ben Johnson offense and still do the off scripted plays? And if that all comes together, then yes, he has the ability and the coach, it would seem, to be able to be, you know, consistently one of those top 10 quarterbacks in the league. But let me ask you about the coach. You brought up those opening drives, which I agree, great for Caleb Williams that he was operating within the scripted drives of Ben Johnson. But at the same time, for a team that had no opening drive touchdowns last year, it's not something we've regularly seen at all with the Chicago Bears offenses for years and years. The fact that it's happened 2 games in a row in the only 2 games of the Ben Johnson era, to me, makes me feel really good about Ben Johnson and that he is the real deal. I know we need to see him operate on Sundays as an NFL head coach. Made the mistake with Cairo Santos in week 1 with the kickoff. Like there's things he's going to make mistakes because he's never had to make those decisions in the moment in real time. That's going to come. I think he's a really smart guy, and I think those things will come to him eventually. But I am really pleased with the offensive scheme. And it's been messy. The running game isn't what Ben Johnson wants. Like I said, Caleb Williams missed some guys in week 1. It's not perfect, but I feel like you can see the foundation there for an offense that when things eventually click, whether that's this season or next season, things are going to start looking really good.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like that is the case. I'm not even concerned about mixing in the rookies yet. Colston Loveland and Luther Burden. I do want to see more tight end targets in general. But the other part of this is you mentioned the off script plays. And I think look at what you just saw with Detroit. If it's a real Ben Johnson offense, you're not seeing that many off scripted plays. You're seeing this work to succession. And that's going to be the hard part, I think, for QB1.
Yeah, no, and he will absolutely have to continually operate on time and within the structure of the offense. I agree. Let me ask you one other thing about Ben Johnson here before we wrap up, because I thought that it was interesting on Monday after the Lions game. We heard him say some things about how it looks for certain players when the ball is not in their hands, which makes you kind of think that there was maybe some effort and some things that we know Ben Johnson has talked about. The no block, no rock. He's been very consistent with his messaging since he's been hired. So I'm just curious kind of what you thought. Obviously, when he says when the ball is not in their hands, he's talking about offensive skill position players. And that means of the ones who have consistently gotten some playing time, there's only 4 or 5 really to pick from there. So I thought it was interesting he narrowed it down there. Do you think he was trying to call out someone specifically? Because to me, it really gets me questioning if DJ Moore is going to be the right fit on this team. I know Bears fans love him, but he had some issues last year. And if he's not on the right side with Ben Johnson, I would not be surprised if the Bears made a bold move. Maybe not this season, but in the offseason.
Well, I think Ben Johnson's asking everybody to block. So I would assume he's talking about everyone. Like, frankly, the Bears have needed every bit of Cole Kmet's blocking skills in these plays. How many times have you seen at the end of a play where 85 is the one protecting the pocket? And I'm not calling Cole Kmet out. I'm actually giving him credit. So I didn't think it was necessarily one person, but I will say this. In every head coaching change, there's going to be talent that people are used to who can produce that don't fit in another person's scheme. And it's just a matter of figuring out who goes. In fact, if you recall, that's how the Bears ended up with Khalil Mack. So that was birth of a head coaching change in Vegas. So the question becomes, how does that play out here? Because we didn't really see that. And that's kind of surprising.
Yeah, and I think, when you see a new GM come in, you see a massive overhaul. Ryan Pace only kept a handful of guys. Ryan Poles only kept a handful of Ryan Pace's guys. To me, I understand same GM is here right now and presumably here for the next few years. To me, this almost feels like a regime change. I feel like Ben Johnson, it may not be he only keeps 5 guys from the Matt Eberflus era, but I do feel there's going to be significant overhaul with this roster. And guys like DJ Moore and Montez Sweat, if they don't start producing and not, and aren't doing the things that Ben Johnson or Dennis Allen want to see them consistently do on a regular basis, it would not shock me if they get traded in the offseason and the Bears get what they can get, because like we said earlier in this interview, they're up against it with the salary cap. They don't have a lot of space. They're going to either have to restructure deals or let some of these big paying contracts go if they want to tweak the roster moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. And I have been thinking about it ever since they brought Ben Johnson in, because I've been waiting to see it happen. And maybe it's a trade deadline thing. I don't know. But they point to that bye week like it's a big deal, and the timing works out there.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. So last question for you. Bears are sitting at 0-2. You talked about the difficult schedule here. Where are you moving forward for the season? Are you still hopeful they can get a winning record? Are you still hopeful they can fight for a playoff spot? Or is this, you want to see Caleb Williams develop? You want to see everything kind of get better, and whether they get 5 wins or 7 wins, as long as it looks better, that's all you're looking for at this point?
I think if they only get 5 wins, you got a problem. Even with what I said about the 2022 Lions, I think you have a problem because the defense, for example, is worse off than we realized. That was my first, I think, my first big observation out of what I've seen. I knew the offense would be a work in progress, because the phrase "strip it down to the studs" is not something people do insincerely. They don't say that without letting you know this is going to look ugly before it looks good. What I didn't expect was all the breakdowns on defense, especially with all the money they sent. All the money they paid. So given that, your hope is that they're still a 7 to 9 win team at this point. Like I had said originally 9. I don't think that's possible now, because the Vikings game was absolutely needed to try to get them there. A team is going to lose a game that they are supposed to win in a season. Even the best of the teams do that. They're also probably going to win a game that you thought they were going to lose. The Bears don't do that. Like, they haven't necessarily won a game that you thought they were going to lose because of how they've lost in the past couple of years. So best case scenario, you're probably looking at an 8-9 season, and you give teams trouble, right? That's probably the ceiling. I don't necessarily want it to be, but just based on what we're seeing, like, I still think that they can beat Dallas. I'm very skeptical of a team that gives up that many points to the Giants. And I know they played the Philadelphia Eagles well, but I also think that the Eagles didn't have Jalen Carter in that game. So I'm hoping that a home field would help, and a softer defense that the Bears are facing would help as well. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think I'm going to be adjusting this expectation the entire season.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. So there she is, Leila Rahimi of 670 The Score. You can check her out middays with Rahimi and Harris. Leila, thanks for the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and we'll catch up with you down the line.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, there she is, Leila Rahimi, everybody. That was a fun interview. That was a good interview. I guess I shouldn't say fun, because we're talking about so many negatives, but that was a good job. I hope you enjoyed that from her. So let's jump right into it. Let's jump into the mailbag, and we'll go through as many of these as we can. Clayton Connis: do you think Richard Hightower is still on the coaching staff in 2026? Special teams has sucked last year and has continued to suck again this year. Only a matter of time until Cairo gets a field goal block. Clayton, I think that's fair to speculate. I'm not going to speculate enough about special teams, because if I'm just being honest, I don't know enough about the specifics of coverage and the strategies and the techniques and everything that Richard Hightower is teaching. I mean, I can look at the punts and say Torrey Taylor doesn't look great. I can look at Cairo Santos. Now, Cairo Santos has been a punching bag on this podcast numerous times over the last few years, because I don't think he should have remained. And I'm sure Richard Hightower had a say, at least somewhat, in Ryan Poles' decision to extend him. I think this has to come down to more about special teams that I really don't know enough about. Now, I assume, I haven't set it up yet, but I would assume Patrick Manley will be on this show. And we always talk special teams when Patrick Manley comes on because there's really nobody better to really break it down. So that'll definitely be a topic, is asking him about Richard Hightower. He could be on next week. He could be on in 6 weeks. Like I said, I haven't organized that at all, but we should have him on at some point, and I always enjoy that conversation. So I'll be curious to see what he says, but I think it's fair to speculate because I was surprised he was retained, to be honest, with Ben Johnson's staff. Maybe Ben Johnson didn't have a special teams guy. He talked to Richard Hightower, thought it would work there. I'm not saying he's doing an awesome job. I'm not saying he's doing a terrible job, but there are some things about special teams that don't look particularly great. And I think it's fair to question if he's the right guy. Beef 209, Poles' extension must have done with Ben Johnson's buy-in. So either he's bad at picking a GM or he wants someone he has leverage over to do his bidding. Which do you think it is? Because if you want to can Poles, you probably have to can Johnson too. I don't want another misaligned GM and head coach. I don't think if Poles gets canned, Ben Johnson gets canned. I think, yes, they tried to put them on the same timeline, but I think Ben Johnson has a lot more rope than Ryan Poles does. I'm not saying that's information. I'm not saying that's sourced. That's just my opinion based on kind of things you hear and whatnot. Now, I understand Ryan Poles has just got an extension. And I'm not saying Ryan Poles is going to get fired. I think this extension came from George McCaskey. And I think when Ben Johnson talked to Ryan Poles in January and decided that this is a guy I could work with, that yes, at that point, that's when Ryan Poles' job was safe for the foreseeable future, and that's why the extension came down. Am I sitting there saying that Ben Johnson pounded the table for Ryan Poles? He might have, or he might have just said, this is fine. And Ryan Poles is the 1B to Ben Johnson's 1A. We don't know exactly how everything is aligned at Hallis Hall. We heard the reports last year that Ryan Poles was crabby, that Kevin Warren was in there, and that he was reporting to Kevin Warren and not straight to George McCaskey. So there's been some issues already with Ryan Poles and how much power he does or doesn't have in the building. And I would assume that Kevin Warren took away some of his power, and I would assume that Ben Johnson has taken away some of his power. But when you've only won 15 games in 3+ seasons, you don't really have a leg to stand on to say this is why I should have more power. So I don't know what Ben Johnson's opinion is of Ryan Poles. Obviously, it's good enough to come here, obviously. Now, again, was he the main reason he came here? No, I think Ben Johnson liked the idea of turning around the Chicago Bears. He liked being part of the charter franchise. He wanted to coach Caleb Williams. I think there were a lot of factors that came in that may have been more important than Ryan Poles, but he certainly felt like he could work with him, or Ryan Poles wouldn't be here, or Ben Johnson wouldn't be here. Bear weather fans, serious question. What was the rationale behind extending Poles this offseason? It's 100% to appease Ben Johnson, right? So how on God's earth do we get Ben Johnson better players when he's the reason we've retained the worst scout in the game? And Bear Weather, I get it. I am not, again, Ben Johnson agreed to come here. It does not mean Ben Johnson pounded the table for Ryan Poles. He might have, he might not have. We don't know exactly what the working relationship is other than that, they're working together. Again, I am not going to sit here and, I think this is all speculation. Unless you can tell me a report that's come out from Courtney Cronin or Brad Biggs or Dan Wiederer that Ben Johnson loves Ryan Poles and is pounding the table for him, then I'll believe you. But right now, all I believe it is a working relationship. And in my opinion, George McCaskey made the decision to extend Ryan Poles because he wanted to put, which they do regularly, right? Ryan Pace got an extension to line up with Matt Nagy. These are the type of things that they do when the GM gets a second head coach. They line them up. So I believe that's all this was, and that was George McCaskey doing it. But again, the alignment of president, GM, head coach, and quarterback has already gotten screwed up. So there was no reason to rush in and do this. They should have waited a year and seen how it went. Because if the Bears go 5-12 again this year, why are you keeping Ryan Poles? Clearly, it's not working under his guidance. So It was a silly thing to do. It makes no sense. And again, maybe it was done to appease Ben Johnson. Maybe it was just done because George McCaskey makes poor decisions for this football team. We're not 100% certain until we get someone digging around in there and figuring out exactly what the relationship is with everyone at Hallis Hall. Because right now you hear a lot of things from national people and in articles that the front office, there might be some rumbles, ticking time bomb, powder keg. We're hearing all these things about the front office. Is this about Jeff King, Ian Cunningham, Ryan Poles, all of the above, Ben Johnson? We don't know any of this. We just know that there's something going on. We've had a couple articles written here from Dan Wiederer and Ty Dunn that don't paint a great picture. We don't know what's going on, but we know it certainly could be more cohesive and better run. That's for sure. All right, how about JK999? How much of a hot seat is Poles sitting on? Can he be fired this season, or will we have to wait out his contract? If we have to wait out his contract, will Ben Johnson be able to bring in his own personnel guys? Well, JK, I will say this. I think Ryan Poles' seat probably isn't that hot. Now, again, if they have an awful season, I think all bets are off. But if they recover here a little bit and go 7-10, which is a 2-win improvement from last season, are the Bears gonna freak out? This is early in Ben Johnson. He's trying to set a culture. He's trying to teach Caleb Williams. It's gonna be a process. It's not gonna just come in and win 12 games kind of a thing. So I don't know if we can say that Ryan Poles is on any kind of a hot seat when he just got an extension. But let's see how this season plays out, and maybe heads will need to roll if things fall apart. Now, if things recover and they're decent, they don't have to be great, they just have to be decent. I think Ryan Poles is here for at least another season. Like I said, Ryan Poles has 2 years now left on his current deal, then the 3-year extension on top of that. So you would think that they'd want to get into that extension before they fire him. But again, it's going to depend on how this thing looks and how this team plays and if they start winning football games. At some point, you're going to have to point the finger at somebody. Ryan Poles' winning percentage is terrible. So I just have a hard time sitting here saying Ryan Poles is definitely safe for 3 or 4 years as long as Ben Johnson is here. But I also have a hard time saying Ryan Poles' seat is at all warm. I think it was at the tail end of last season, and the decision was made to keep him, and then the seat cools, especially once the extension comes down. So again, I have a hard time sitting here saying, oh, Poles' seat is burning hot. The Bears are 0-2. Nothing's working the way it's supposed to, when they literally extended him a few months ago. All right, barely interesting. When does the plug get pulled on underperformers like Braxton and Stevenson? And by extension, do we see veterans getting benched or traded due to effort concerns or lack of performance? Barely interesting. I think that is going to be one of the more interesting things over the next few weeks. Is clearly Ben Johnson is unhappy with effort. He pointed it out on his Monday press conference about how guys are playing when they don't have the hands in the ball. Now, obviously, that's pointing out skill position players. But at the same time, like you mentioned, Tyreek Stevenson, he's got a perfect passer rating against. And we can sit there and say it's a flawed stat. But 158.3 passer rating against does not mean you are playing good football. So, what will it take? Now, at the same time, with Tyreek Stevenson, the Bears CB1 and the Bears main outside backup corner are on the injured list for, presumably the rest of the season with Jalen Johnson and Terrell Smith. So who can you bench Tyreek Stevenson for? Kyler Gordon's banged up. You need Nick McLeod on the inside there because Josh Blackwell's been banged up. There's just not a lot of depth there because you literally, when you expected the Bears 6 cornerbacks coming into this year, right? You expected them to be Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, Terrell Smith, Zay Frazier, and then, probably Josh Blackwell, right? That's probably what you expected the 6 to be. So now when we look at where the Bears are in terms of their cornerback room, Jalen Johnson's out, Terrell Smith is out, Josh Blackwell's been banged up, Kyler Gordon's been banged up. You've already eliminated 4 out of the top 6. So that leaves you with Tyreek Stevenson, and there's just not enough And I'm sorry, 5 out of the 6, because Zay Frazier, we know, is not playing this season as well. So when you have 6 cornerbacks you're expecting to have on your roster, and 5 of them are unavailable, and the only one left is Tyreek Stevenson, it's really hard to bench Tyreek Stevenson. Now, his performance absolutely deserves to be benched. I just don't know if you're going to get a better performance from practice squad level players that you have behind him. Now, I know they have Jalen Jones, they have Nick McLeod, they've got some decent guys that can play, but they are really thin on this room. They need Kyler Gordon to get back in the worst way. I'm just not exactly sure what the course of action is here. But what I do think is interesting is, are you willing to bench veterans that aren't giving enough effort, aren't doing the things, the attention to details, the thing that Ben Johnson really wants? Are you willing to bench them at the cost of possibly winning football games to send a message that says, this is how we play football now at Hallis Hall and as the Chicago Bears, and if you don't, you will not be on this football team? Now again, we don't know if he was calling out DJ Moore, but it does feel like DJ Moore was, if it was a group of guys, was at least part of the guys. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to reduce DJ Moore's snap count and only have him out there 50% of the snaps? Are you going to call plays where DJ Moore is the second or third option and just kind of ice him out of the game? Because DJ Moore is a weapon. He is an excellent football player. So if you want to just cut DJ Moore out, you will decrease the odds of winning the football game, but you will increase the odds of building the culture you want to have at Hallis Hall. It's a tricky, area to maneuver here for Ben Johnson. It's going to be curious if we see some guys, some veterans, and suddenly their snap counts go way down. That's going to make you think that they had issues with Ben Johnson running it the way he wanted, and he's trying to make a point. So barely interesting. I think it's going to be fascinating to see the next couple weeks if we see changes in snap counts and how the Bears offense and defense is run. Jason Black says, if the Bears have a fire sale being 2-6 at the trade line, could they be dealing players like Kmet, Zaccheaus, Sweat, DJ Moore? Will Poles be here to waste those picks next year? So I think, yes, it's possible they can be sellers at the trade deadline. Now, again, do you ever see teams just dump players like that? No, you don't. And at the same time, it's going to be, to me, it's going to be an issue of, are they buying into the culture? Because again, that's what you're really trying to build this year, is the culture. Now, we were hoping there were going to be some wins along the way, and we're still hoping for that. Haven't seen it yet, but this is a culture building year. So is Cole Kmet buying into the culture and working hard and doing the things? Like, he seems to be blocking pretty scrappily out there right now. So do you want to just trade Cole Kmet to dump salary, or do you want to keep Cole Kmet because he's buying into the culture? Olamide Zaccheaus is a coach's best friend. He does everything out there. He blocks. He, runs routes crisply, even if he knows he's not going to be getting the football. He's the type of guy you like to have on your team. If you can get a good draft pick for him, then yeah, maybe you just want to move him because you're not going to see him as part of your big picture. But let's say Ben Johnson has a big plan to, again, I'm not saying this is happening, but I'm just bringing it up. You brought up DJ Moore, Jason Black. So let's say in the offseason they trade DJ Moore. You've got now Rome Odunze and Luther Burden, presumably, as your top 2 wide receivers. You've got, if you still have Cole Kmet, you have Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland as your top 2 tight ends. So there's your 12 personnel. You don't have a third receiver at that point that you'd be confident to have in rotation when you go 3 wide receiver sets. So to me, Olamide Zaccheaus, as if the Bears run a lot of heavy 12 personnel, but they still have Zaccheaus there so they can shift to 3 receiver sets, I would keep Zaccheaus. So I'm not high on selling him right now. I don't think the Bears are probably, unless someone comes in, here's a first pick, here's a 2 and a 3, unless the Bears get their socks blown off by someone over a trade for a guy like Moore or Sweat, I can't see them making a big move like that at the deadline. It's just not something I see, because honestly, at that point, I mean, Montez Sweat, are you going to get a ton for him if he's not having a great season? And if he's having a great season, do you want to trade him? So I think that's the kind of situation the Bears are in. Joe Barzak At this point, if the Bears come out of this season feeling great about the head coach quarterback, with Caleb having taken a major leap in year 2, can this year be considered a success? In other words, looking well on his way to being an elite QB, wins may not be there with this defense. I think the wins will be there in a certain extent, because I don't get it. Dennis Allen knows what he's doing. I don't think the defense is going to continue to be this bad unless they just get decimated by injuries. And Jalen Johnson certainly hurts a ton. Well, he's their only blue chip player on defense. So that's going to hurt. But if Brisker stays healthy, if Gordon stays healthy, when he gets back, if they get a little more out of the secondary, they can absorb Johnson's loss a little bit. But is TJ Edwards going to be back? Is that going to be a problem all season? What exactly is going to happen? I think Dennis Allen can get this defense playing better. I'm not saying it'll be great, but I'm saying it'll be good enough where if Caleb Williams is making those huge steps that you say he's making with Ben Johnson, the offense is going to start scoring points. And I don't see this team losing games 38-31 constantly. So I think if the defense gets just a little better, you're going to be looking at a situation where they'll start winning some football games. They may not win as many as we were hoping for or expecting at the start of the season. It may be more in that 7-10 range, but I just, don't want to sit there and say that if Caleb Williams plays really well, they're going to win 9 or 10 games. If Caleb Williams plays poorly, they're going to win 5 games. I do think there's some gray area, as you kind of allude to there, but yes, I will say, as long as they win some games, because if they go 4-13 or 5-12 and Caleb Williams is awesome, I just think that's basically an impossibility. That if Caleb Williams takes huge strides and is playing really well, like the back half of this season, I just think they're going to win some football games by default, because having an elite quarterback with an elite play caller and a really good defensive coordinator, I think that's going to be enough to start getting some wins in the win column. Joe Tucio, what are your thoughts on Poles' future? They signed him to an extension, but no excuse anymore for a lot of his draft misses and free agent moves. And I kind of addressed it already, Joe. I have not pulled any punches on this podcast. I would have, if I was running the Chicago Bears, Ryan Poles would have been fired at the end of this season. He had no business staying here based on his first 3 years, and he certainly did not deserve that extension based on 15 wins in 3 seasons. So to me, that was a mistake, but now you have him under contract for 5 years. He is here for 5 years. Now, again, he's not making the $13 million or whatever it is that Ben Johnson is. He's not making the $6 million probably or so that Matt Eberflus was making. He's probably making $2.5 to $3 million a year. So does it make it more possible that they can let him go at some point during this contract? Yes, because it won't be quite as much to eat. But at the same time, you're still paying off Matt Eberflus's contract because he had 2+ years left when he was fired. So you got, almost 2 full seasons of Matt Eberflus's contract to pay off. Do they want to just pile on a Ryan Poles extension that they never even touch because they got rid of him right away? I just don't know. We know this is the new look Bears and Kevin Warren is here and they fired a coach in season and they've done some different things. But are they willing to have $30 million not in dead cap, but in front office and coach payments that they're paying off for guys that are coaching and working for other franchises? I just don't know. I wish I could say, oh, this is how the Bears are going to do this, but we don't know if the Bears are willing to, how much money the Bears are willing to eat. When they've got, money issues with this, they're not getting any public money. Pritzker doesn't want to give them any public money for this stadium. They've got a Caleb Williams contract on the horizon. They've got a lot of, presumably, assuming Caleb's good enough, they've got a lot of money that they need to commit to. So are they willing to eat another $15 million to tell Ryan Poles to go work for another franchise? I don't have an answer for you. JD Brown, is the current Bears fan sadness explained by mismatched expectations for the season? If we finish this season feeling Caleb is the franchise QB we've so desperately hoped for, would you accept that as a good outcome for this season, given all the coaching change? JD, yes, that is a good outcome. It's not a great outcome. It's still lower than the expectations we had, because I think as Bears fans, we were sitting here going, if Caleb Williams is the guy and Ben Johnson is the guy, the Bears are going to win games by default. And that is still largely true. The question is I think Bears fans were expecting a little more out of the gate. And as me on this podcast who said, I expect things to start a little slow, and obviously they have, I still expected a little more functionality on offense and on defense than they've shown at this point. So to me, yes, it's a successful season if we know 100% Ben Johnson knows what he's doing, not just calling plays. Ben Johnson knows what he's doing as a sideline CEO on Sundays. Ben Johnson's calling a great offense. Caleb Williams looks like the guy that's going to be a top 10 quarterback for the next decade. If that all exists after the season, even if they are 6-11, you have to be positive going into 2026. But at the same time, you can't tell a fan who's frustrated because 2024 was supposed to be the breakout. 2025 was supposed to be the breakout. Now 2026 is supposed to be the breakout for this team. At some point, you just sit here and go, this team is not breaking out. End of story. And then that's where you go back to Ryan Poles. Cav Manning, the sky is falling, but I consider it an evaluation year, and Ben will cut dead weight after, hoping it's like Detroit when they were 1-6 and clicked. I worry for Caleb's accuracy, though. I think if we had just a pro QB playing, it would look better right now. It's not Madden. It takes times. And Cav, I think that's all fair. I actually put out a tweet after the Bears game Sunday and said that the 2022 Lions that were 1-6, that was kind of where the ceiling is now, that clearly this team's going to get off to a slow start. I'm not saying they're going to go 0-8, but clearly, they're probably not looking at better than like 2-5 or so at this point early on. And if that's the case, then yeah, it's probably going to be a team that if it starts clicking and coming together on the back half of the season, they'll get to be more of a pain in the ass. Now, Caleb's accuracy, you know how concerned I was about that after week 1 because it was a carryover from year 1. But Caleb Williams, his inaccurate passes were 28%. Now it's 18%. So I didn't look at the specifics for game 2, but simple math to tell you his inaccurate passes in week 2 were probably only about 8%. So while 18% is still way too high, it's still going to be in the bottom half of the league. If he's in that 8 to 10% range for most of the season moving forward, and that creeps up to like 12%, that's a big improvement from where he was last year. So you can hope for better results there. So, could it look better right now with just a professional quarterback? I assume you're talking about a Joe Flacco, an Andy Dalton, a guy like that just knows how, he's not great, but just knows how to operate an offense. Yeah, probably. It probably would be a little better right now, but it still doesn't change the fact that this team gave up 700 yards again for their opponents in the last 5 quarters. So there are holes beyond the offense not clicking exactly like you would have hoped. The offensive line has given DeAndre Swift leading the way, 1.8 yards per carry before contact, and yet DeAndre Swift is still one of the lowest graded running backs in the league when you look at his stats. So there's issues because they don't have the right personnel in place in a lot of spots. We'll see how this moves going forward. But yes, it's an evaluation year. And as I've said, you say Ben's going to cut dead weight. I do think that's going to happen because, as I have said throughout this offseason, I would look at Ben Johnson as a regime change. We talked about when Ryan Pace took over for Phil Emery. He kept 5 guys from Phil Emery's teams, right? He kept Charles Leno. He kept Sherrick McManus. He kept Kyle Fuller. He kept Kyle Long. And he kept Pat O'Donnell. That was it. Then Ryan Poles, when you look at who he carried over from Ryan Pace, he kept Jalen Johnson. He kept Cole Kmet. He kept, a couple other guys, Cairo Santos. I don't remember the exact list, but again, he didn't keep many guys from Ryan Pace. Now, again, I know Ryan Poles is still here, but it's my belief that Ben Johnson is more of the 1A in football operations. And if Ben Johnson's sitting here saying, I don't want this guy, I don't want this guy, I don't want this guy, that's going to happen. And that's where I go back to the Rick Smith interview about GM alignment. And Rick Smith said it on this podcast. He said GM alignment means that a GM is willing to share the vision of the head coach and willing to part with the guys that he loves. He talked about specifically how GMs fall in love with their guys. They fall in love with their draft picks, with their free agent signings. And these are the great guys that are going to be for the franchise. But he has to be willing to part with those guys. So to me, that's exactly what Rick Smith was saying via Ben Johnson there, is that Ben Johnson is going to be making changes on this roster. And I think there will be some surprises. Maybe it's DJ Moore. Maybe it's Cole Kmet. Maybe it's Montez Sweat. I think everyone expects Tremaine Edmonds to be gone at this point, based on production versus how much money he makes. I think everyone expects Braxton Jones to be gone. I think people expect DeAndre Swift to be gone. We expect some of those moves, but I think there may be a couple big moves where we go, oh, that just happened as well. Scott says, it's over, boss. We find our Parsons edge with our 2026 top 5 pick. I don't know if the Bears are picking top 5, but if they're picking top 5, that means they won 5 games at most. And we're having bigger conversations than, Micah Parsons just doesn't grow on a tree. He's not available in every draft. Jason Black, where do we go from here? I predict Bear fan apathy by the bye. 9/14/25, the day the season died. How are the Bears brass to sell a stadium to the public of 5 years of brutal football? This team is chasing fans away. Will it take a polls firing a blockbuster trade? Jason, it's too early to just sell the season at 0-2. Now, again, things looked awful, but at the same time, again, and I'm not saying this is a great result, but let's look at the Matt Eberflus season in 2023, where they went 7-10. What happened? Do we remember how that season started? How the Bears were embarrassing themselves constantly. We didn't think this team had any ability to win football games. Any, right? You remember those games, the Denver Broncos debacle where they blew that lead, the Green Bay Packers opening game where they couldn't, 3rd and 15, and Jordan Love's just completing passes all over the place, and the Bears lose that game. The Chiefs just absolutely ran the Bears off the field. They didn't look like a professional football team, and they still finished 7-10. So if the 2022 Bears or 2023 Bears can win 7 games, then certainly this team can win 6 or 7 games as well. It may take a while for it to come together, but at the same time, like I said, I'm concerned. I hate what I've seen through 2 weeks, but at the same time, I'm not sitting here selling the season because I think the Chicago Bears, there's a lot that can improve in a lot of different ways. And when you're trying to change the culture like Ben Johnson is, this has been a losing culture for a lot of years. And going back to Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, the last couple of years there, this has been a losing culture. And it's going to take a while to turn that all around, because a losing culture isn't just the 53 guys on the field. It's how, in terms of talent, it's how you operate day to day. It's how the coaches operate day to day. It's who's slacking in the weight room, who's working hard, who's putting in extra work. The whole franchise needs to operate with a cleaner operation if they are going to start becoming a winning franchise. So it takes a long time to fix that. And in terms of selling a stadium, it's going to be damn hard. Now, this city loves the Bears. Wins or losses be damned. They will support this team. But in terms of, you want to talk about, I assume there's going to be PSLs. I'm a season ticket holder. I had to pay PSLs for the stupid, Soldier Field redo. And we're just flushing that down the toilet. All the money the fans spent so they could continue to see mostly a losing operation for the last 2 decades. Now you're going to ask those season ticket holders to pony up more money. Pritzker's all pissed because the Bears still haven't paid off the loan on the Soldiers Field, freshen up, from 20 years ago. It's a problem. Pritzker doesn't want to give the Bears any more money. The Bears don't have enough money to build this stadium on their own. I don't know exactly where this is going. I think it's a bigger mess than people realize. Kevin Warren's putting on a smiling face. Oh, it's going to be a great stadium. And I think eventually when they build it, it will be a great stadium. But they're going to have to sell 10% of this team to private equity. They're going to have to do some things to find some cash and figure out a way to get this thing built. I think eventually they'll get some public money, but it's not going to be for the total they wanted, and they're going to have to compromise with Pritzker. All right, let's give you, that was a really long mailbag, but thank you for all the questions. Let's get to the prediction. Dallas Cowboys on Sunday. After these 2 games, there is absolutely no reason to expect the Chicago Bears to win. I know the Cowboys haven't looked great either, but they have looked far more professional than the Bears have. The Cowboys, I know it took them, a circus to beat the Giants in overtime last week. but they look decent against the Eagles in week 1. Now, Matt Eberflus is still playing soft zones on third down, and the Cowboys are giving up tons of third down conversions. Looking forward to that. I really would love the Bears to beat Matt Eberflus, but if they don't beat Matt Eberflus, I would love for the Cowboys defense to look bad, right? Bears can lose, but still kind of run circles around Matt Eberflus, and at least you have a little something to hang your hat on if you're a Chicago Bears fan. So I expect this one to be a lot more high scoring. I think Ben Johnson is going to be able to exploit Matt Eberflus's defense. Caleb Williams looked a little better in week 2 than he did in week 1. Hopefully he looks a little better in week 3 than he did in week 2, and that will result in some more functionality in the offense and some points being scored. So I'm going to say this is a high-scoring game. I'm going to say that the Cowboys win this one 31-27. I think it'll be high-scoring. I think Caleb Williams will have his best game of the season, but I think Dak Prescott is going to have his best game of the season, and I don't know who's covering CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, but it's going to be a problem. So we'll see how this works out, but I expect the Cowboys to win this one just because right now you have to say the Cowboys are a better football team. Now, again, maybe they can have things taken care of and they look a lot better and they can turn things around and win this game, but you just have to go off of what you're seeing on the field. And what I'm seeing on the field is the Dallas Cowboys are a better football operation. They are a better football team. And despite being on the road, I think the Cowboys win this one. So again, 31-27, Dallas with the victory. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. We will talk to you next week. Bear down, everybody. Adios.